Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of 2D Top-Down Twin Stick Shooter. My name is Casanis. Guys, in the last episode, we took a look at creating our enemy attacks, and in this episode, we're going to take a look at creating our player attacks. All right, let's get started. Okay, guys, let's start off by looking at the enemy health system. We have to have a way that the enemy can track their own health, exactly like we did with the player. So to start off with, we've got ourselves a max health. The max health is the value that the enemy starts off with, either the enemy or the enemy hazard, whatever it is that you want to destroy. Below that, we have our current health, and the max health is what they start off with. The current health is a snapshot at any given moment of what the actual object's health is. In the start function, we set our current health equal to our max health. Therefore, this object starts off completely healthy. That's just what that means. Down here, the only other thing I have right now is this add damage function. It works exactly like the player's add damage function. So we've got a public accessor function called add damage that takes in as a parameter a damage value. That damage value is then subtracted from the current health of the object. And if the object's health or current health goes below 0 or is equal to 0, then we destroy the game object. So at this point in time, we aren't doing a whole lot with this. All we're doing is making this object blink out of existence. Obviously, as we move forward in this game, if we want to make a nice clean game with lots of feedback, something would have to happen here, an explosion of particles or whatever we want to happen. Okay, so that's the enemy health system. It's super simplistic. Let's take a look at what we need to do to the actual object itself to make this work. So for this example, I'm just going to use an existing object that I have. We'll just use the spike base. And what I did to the spike base, actually at the top, so we're actually using the spike. At the very top on the spike base layer, I've added myself a collider and I made it into a trigger. Whatever you want to use as your hitbox is perfectly fine. I used a circle collider. There it is right there. I've got a circle collider right there. And I've aligned it with where I want this object to be able to be hit by or hit at. It's the hitbox, so the hit location. Below that, I've added in the enemy health system. All I had to do was slap it in here and give it a maximum health value, and the rest of it should be taken care of by the code itself. Okay, so our enemy is ready to go. Now let's take a look at what we have to do for the player to actually be able to attack. So I've made a quick change to the scriptable object of the player, and this may have been a mistake, but this is how I'm doing it for now, and if I have to change it later on, I can. There's a lot of different ways to be able to do this. I had to make some decisions about what this game is, and I kind of decided that the characters themselves, whatever character class you bring in, they have one weapon and that's the weapon they have. So maybe if we add updates later on that allows the player to increase their weapon damage, etc., that's perfectly fine, but the weapon itself won't change. So the wizard will always have a wizard wand, the druid will always have the druid staff, the barbarian will always have the two-handed sword, and so on. So what I did in the scriptable object was I added in a game object to represent the projectile that the character would use. And again, we're doing this exactly the same way that we did the enemy attacks. We're going to create a projectile. That projectile is going to do all the damage and everything else. We're just going to have something on the character class, on the actual character, that's going to say instantiate a projectile, and from there, the projectile will take care of itself. I also included an attack rate, so this is how often the character can attack. I decided to include the attack rate here and the projectile here, like I said, to kind of make sure the classes remained what they were. So we didn't have a barbarian with a druid staff. Theoretically, we could, and if we wanted to do that, then we might move these values onto the actual weapons themselves. So the weapons could be something separate. We might have a separate scriptable object for the weapons. We'd start to make details about the weapons, and this would be added to the actual character class that way. So you'd have your character come in, and then later on you could just have a different object that you'd slap on that would become the character's weapon. I don't want to do that, so I've added that here. If you want to do that, so if you want to have like an inventory system where you can change out your weapons, you'll do it slightly differently. Okay, with these two things available, we're going to have to add certain things to our character. We're going to have to make sure that our character has the ability to actually attack, and we're going to have to make sure that we've created a bunch of different projectiles that is going to be the projectiles that our characters use. So let's move this out of the way and take a look at the actual character. So we're going to be on here now. So the character itself has to have a few changes made to it. First of all, let's take a look at the changes we had to make to the actual action map. We were using fire previously. In one of the first episodes, we take a look at how to set this up. and we had an action type of button. We want to change this, and I'm sure there's probably a more simplistic way of doing it. However, I've done it in this following manner. What I've decided to do is if you are holding the attack button, and the attack button is going to be the trigger, so the fire button, the right trigger, it's going to take a look at whether or not you're holding the trigger down. And if you're holding the trigger down, then we are going to assume the attack is occurring. If you let go of the trigger, then we're going to assume that the attack is stopped. When we use the value of button, if I hover over here, when we use the value of button, there is a call that's made whenever the state first changes. So whenever we go from 0 for the button to whatever the value is, as soon as that state change occurs, we receive information saying, hey, the button's been pressed. But we don't actually get back that value whenever we release the button. With the action type of value, what I can do is the action type of value basically checks to see if a change of state has occurred. So if I've gone from the default state to a new state. And once that new state is reached, or it's the very second the default state has been changed, it says, okay, well, you're pressing the button. And then as I go from that new state back down to 0, it tells me you stopped pressing the button. So that's why I've used value here. What I've decided to do is set up a Boolean that's called attacking in the script, and it's going to say if the button is pressed, if the trigger is pulled, then you are attacking, and when the trigger is released, you're not attacking anymore. So we have to be able to set that Boolean to either true or false based on this value. So we have to know both situations, when we are not pressing the button and when we stop pressing the button. Both of those things are important. Okay, so what does that mean as far as our character is concerned? Let's take a look at the changes we have to make on our character now. Let's take a look at the scene. And let's go into our player here. So there's not a whole lot of changes that are going to occur within the player itself. In fact, I don't think I had to make any changes in here at all. I had to make changes to the scriptable object, but that's it. Otherwise, I didn't have to make any changes. So what did I have to change? I had to make changes to existing functions. So let me grab it from over here. I had to make changes to this existing function, to our player control system. And if you remember, the player control system was in charge of actions like movement and looking and that kind of thing. So what have I done here? I have set it up so that we are now dealing with the fire action as well, the on fire action. And that's, like I said, going to be how we attack. If I take a look, I've added in an attack rate. The attack rate is being drawn from the player character. It is in our scriptable object right here, our attack rate. So it's going to be drawn from there. We have a reference to the projectile, and again, scriptable object, it comes from there. And we have this reference that we're going to be using. So this is going to be a reference to the projectile once we instantiate it. After that, just like we did with the enemies, we have an attacking Boolean for either true or false, and we have a ready to attack to either be true or false. Okay, so let's take a look. First of all, let's go all the way down here and take a look at our on fire. Our on fire right here. There's not a lot of code here. It's really, really simplistic. We are reading in we are looking at our on fire. We've got a fire value that we're reading as one of the parameters. And we take that parameter and we read it in as a float. And then we take a look at the absolute value. This is probably unnecessary. I don't think we can get a 0 value with the trigger. But that said, I'm looking at the absolute value of the float, and I'm comparing it to the value of 0. If it's greater than 0, then I'm attacking. So I set my attacking to be true. If my ready to attack is also true, then I start the coroutine, my attack coroutine. However, if this value is not greater than 0, so it's a value that's 0, that's it, because we're only taking a look at the absolute value. So if this is a 0 value, then we set our attacking to false. So this is going to be how we start, and this is going to be how we stop. Okay, so afterwards, we start our coroutine. Like I said, if we're supposed to attack, we start our coroutine. Let's take a look at our coroutine. Okay, so down here in our coroutine, what we do is we grab ourselves let me make this a little bigger so you guys can see it. We instantiate the projectile at the location of our aim object, so at the origin of our aim object. So it's going to be coming from the center of the character rather than from the weapon. You could actually move this if you wanted to, so it was being built in a particular location, according to where the character's weapon is if you really wanted to. I'm setting it up so it's being instantiated right in the middle of the character, and that's where everything's happening. I'm starting it off with no rotation, so quaternion identity means no rotations being brought in at 0, 0, 0. I probably could have done this in one step, but afterwards what I do is I set the direction of that object in the direction that I'm aiming. So this is what this is. My look direction from previously is a vector that we had that was associated with aiming our actual aim object. So we pull it out of here and we set an appropriate direction. We'll take a look at this in 1 second. It's actually associated with this player attack damage. Afterwards, as soon as we do this, so we've instantiated, we've set it going the right way, we set our attack ready equal to 0. After that, we come into here and we wait for an attack rate amount of time. And then we set our value back to be true. So you might be thinking, okay, well, that only runs it once. And that's true. So we had to go up here to our update. And again, this could have gone in update, or I guess it could have gone, depending on how fast you were firing, I guess it could have gone in your fixed update. But I put it into the update. And basically my update says if I'm attacking and my attack is ready, then I'm going to run that subroutine again, that coroutine again. So it doesn't use recursive action like we did with the enemy. In this case, we are using our update to just to check to see if these values are accurate. And if they are, then it's going to continuously fire. We can probably run into a problem here. Theoretically, if our update was really slow and our and our ability to update these values is really slow, we could run into a problem. But or if it was really, really fast and we were checking this too often, we also could probably run into a problem where there was a race condition between these values. But I don't think it's going to actually happen, and I'm not overly worried about it. So I've got myself this attack that's run on the update, and as long as I'm holding that trigger, my attacking is true, and my attacking ready is set down here inside the coroutine itself. So that's basically how the actual attack works. Now, I did say that we had to have ourselves a projectile. So let me drag this out of the way, and then we'll take a look at the projectiles, which I have built right here inside of my prefabs. I've created a number. I've created an arrow. I've created a fireball, and I've created a sword swing. I'm probably going to add more later on to vary the different types that I've got for, two-handed sword and mace or whatever. But for now, let's just take a look at how these are all kind of done exactly the same way. So let's take a look at how these are done. If I take a look, I'll double click on my arrow projectile here so we can see it. The arrow projectile has a projectile base and it has the art associated with it. Okay, so the projectile base has a number of different things. It has obviously the transform node, but it has a rigid body. It has a destroy me script that allows it to be destroyed after a certain amount of time. It has a collider that's set up as a trigger. So this is the trigger zone, and whenever that interrupts or hits an actual enemy, it's going to then trigger the actions. And lastly, we've got ourselves a player damage script. And these are all done in exactly the same way. What changes is the values here in our player damage script, the size of our collider, that kind of thing is all that really changes, how long it's alive. It's pretty much the same for all of these things. So all of them are kind of the same. Okay, so what exactly is the damage script then? Let's take a look. So our player attack damage script, which is right here, basically is a really kind of simplistic, straightforward script. We've got ourselves the amount of damage that this particular asset does. We've got our link to the rigid body, a reference to the rigid body. We have a speed that it can be set at. We like how fast it's moving, if it's moving. We have whether or not this object can be destroyed. So I've decided that there might be two options for this, and we're probably going to add even something more in here later on. We'll take a look at that maybe in a later video. I've decided that we are going to add a destroy on contact. So this thing could either like travel through objects. So let's say for the fireball, I want this thing to be something that's going to travel through all my enemies until it's destroyed. Or like the arrow, when I fire the arrow hits one thing and then it's gone. So if destroy on contact is true, we're going to instantly destroy the object as soon as it makes contact with an enemy. And if it's not true, then it'll continue on and deal damage along the way as it moves along. I've got an array of audio clips that lets me mix up the sounds a little bit. On our start, we find ourselves the rigid body using get component. This is going to be necessary. You have to have a rigid body associated with the interactions that are going to be occurring between two triggers. If you don't have a rigid body on one of the assets, then we won't actually get the information back from the interaction. So you have to have a rigid body. I should probably put the line of code in here that ensures that I have a rigid body associated with a projectile so that I always have one, and I know I always have a rigid body associated with the interaction. I should probably do that. That's probably a good, safe method. However, I have to deal with the fact that I want to turn gravity off, etc. So I'm not going to bother. For now, I'm just going to assume that I always have one. That's error prone. That's not the best way to code, but I'm going to leave it like that anyway. As soon as this thing starts, we hit our audio source, we play clip at point, and play clip at point means that regardless of whether or not this object is destroyed, the asset, the audio asset is created elsewhere as a standalone object and it continues to play. So that's kind of important, especially if I'm destroying this object on contact. So if I have a noise that's 1 second long that I want associated with an attack, and then the object is destroyed before that sound finishes, it'll just cut it off instantly. And we don't want that, right? We want that sound to continue. So by using play clip at point, instead of having it associated with an audio source, I play clip at point. It chooses a random clip from the assets that I've given it, from the array that I've given it, and it just plays it at its local location. After that, let's take a look. We've got a public access to set the direction. So if I actually have a moving projectile, I can set it so that it's facing the right way. I set it up and I multiply it by the speed value, and that gets it moving right away. Its velocity moving right away. So we're using velocity here as opposed to a add force. And so this object will instantly be going at the speed that I want to go at. And it'll remain at that speed for the entire time. Okay, if there is no rigid body, and I guess this is no good because there always will be a rigid body, I think. So this is probably unnecessary. Anyway, we set our speed right away. If the value is 0, so if my speed is equal to 0, we're going to be multiplying our direction by 0, and there won't be any velocity associated with it. So therefore, if we have an object that we want to be moving, we give it a value greater than 0, it'll be moving at that rate. If we give it a value of 0 for the speed, then it'll be instantiated directly on top of where it's supposed to be, and it will not move. Okay, the last thing we do is we have an on trigger enter, so that if we are interacting with the enemy, so we've set up our enemy to have the tag of enemy, then we are damaging our enemy, and we find the add damage function that we talked about previously using get component, and after that we destroy this object if destroy on contact is true. That's it. There's nothing else here. Okay, a quick change, something that I forgot to mention, is inside of the player controller, we do have to have a reference to the projectile and the attack rate. So previously, we wrote ourselves a public function that was called, right here, set PCSO, that was originally called from the initialization script. It comes in here and it actually sets up so that we have a reference to our scriptable object, the proper scriptable object. Inside of this function, we now set our projectile to the proper projectile. So based on the PC that's coming in, so which player character is coming in, we set up the projectile, we set up our attack rate. Okay, so those extra 2 lines were necessary in order to have a reference to the actual projectile in the attack script as well as the attack rate. Okay, let's get back to it. So obviously I had to go in and I had to make changes to my scriptable objects. So now each of my scriptable objects has an attack projectile that's associated with it and its attack rate. So my barbarian, for example, will use a sword swing and it will attack once per second. The druid is going to use the wizard's fireball for now and have an attack rate of 1 per second. You can change these values. The gnome is going to use the arrow and it's going to have an attack rate of 1 per second. Obviously, like I said, I can change these values. But let's hit play and check out exactly what happens. Actually, I'm playing focused here. You pause this, pull back so you guys can see it, and let's unpause it. Okay, so you can see that I can aim, everything like that. This is the arrow-based one. There's my arrow. I can shoot it any direction. I'm holding down my trigger. When I let go of my trigger, it stops shooting. So I'm pulling a trigger, boom, boom, boom. Okay, so I have set up the health system on our little thingy right there. You can see if I run over it, nothing's changed. Still operates as expected. All right, but if I aim at it and I shoot it, now I missed. If I aim it and shoot at it, it's doing X amount of damage every time. I think it had a value of 20, and my arrows did 5 damage each shot. So you can see it is operating exactly as we expect. Let's see if I can get a different one here. All right, here we go. We got our barbarian. This is the barbarian swing. As I'm holding it down, again, same thing. As I move closer, swing, swing, and it's destroyed. All right, guys. So that's it. That's exactly how we do it. It works in a very similar manner to what we did with our enemies. It's really a convenient adjustable system. Depending on what you want to do, you'll move things around a bit so that if you want to have different weapons associated with each class, you might move damage and that onto the weapons themselves. But otherwise, you can use this in any game. All right, everyone. I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you did, let me know down below with a thumbs up. If you didn't, a thumbs down is perfectly fine. I will slowly, over a long period of time, get better at this and be back to where I once was. Anyway, guys, thumbs up, thumbs down, comments down below, and if you haven't done so, please take a few seconds to subscribe. Have yourselves a wonderful day, everyone.